Good morning. That video is especially inspiring to me in that, not just because I use some Apple stuff, but because he's right. You have to start with the customer experience in mind and work backwards from there, and somehow along the way, we lost our way. We actually think we're being customer-centric, but the truth is that we're, just by the nature of our very business, shareholder-centric, stakeholder-centric, and then we try to do the best we can with our customers. The challenge is that we live in interesting times, as we've all seen recently, but we are not our customers. When we go to work, we are part of a team that does these things, that reports on this progress, and fights for budget and resources and justification along the way. There is another side of this story, which is about who the customers are and who they're becoming, and what do we do differently in the roles that we are in today to change. We can't ever be customer-centric if we continue on a path of business as usual, even if your CX team becomes multifunctional or cross-functional across the enterprise. That's a great start, but it means nothing if we don't look at how people are changing, how they make decisions, what they value, what they don't value. Because all of those things are actually at the heart of what leads to innovation. And I know this better than I ever thought I would by going through an arduous cycle of pain for the last 3.5 years. Writing a book about experience design in a digital economy was incredibly ironic. Writing a book about designing experiences in a digital economy. And I felt if I was going to have any leg to stand on, I was going to have to ask myself some tough questions. It was my 7th book, and I thought, well, I'll just do what I always do, try to be as smart and helpful as I can in the format that's available to me. Or start asking questions. What's the point of a book in 2017? How do people retain information? How do people read? How do people want to read? How are apps like Uber and Tinder affecting our brains? How are social networks changing our ability to process information or how to relate to information? And when you start looking at things from that perspective, a whole new world opens up. Some of the crazy things that I had learned, and I used high school teenagers as my inspiration. I studied how long they could do homework using a traditional textbook, knowing that their brains had to struggle to actually use the book because everything about their life outside of that book teaches them differently how to process information or how to learn or how to retain information. Some really fascinating things. 3.5 years ago, the attention span for a high school teenager doing homework with the textbook was 6 minutes before they reached for a technology distraction. So I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to write for 6-minute bursts? It's crazy. And I continued to do the research as I was developing the book, and when I finished the book, that attention span had dropped to 60 seconds. And in that time, everybody got a smartphone. Everybody had Snapchat. Everybody had notifications. And so the ability to concentrate was impossible. So now the reality of living in the real world and the virtual world is it just coexists. It blurs. I had to rewrite the entire book because writing for 6-minute bursts versus 30-second bursts is night and day. And it was incredibly arduous. I missed 5 deadlines. I wanted to quit 1,000 times. But it turns out that some really fascinating insights came out. The whole idea of a linear table of contents no longer really works as it used to. There's a much more dynamic way to present information. The whole idea of chapter structures could be reinvented. Paragraphs, visual learning, all kinds of insights that would go into an app, basically, applied to paper was game-changing. So why am I sharing this story with you? Because I wouldn't have known that had I not put myself in an empathetic position to understand the reader, what they needed to get out of it, what value they needed. And it was eye-opening. And everything about that experience made me rewrite that book for a 3rd time. That, I'm not going to lie to you, wasn't easy. And also going to a 100-year-old publisher to say, hey, listen, I have this idea for a book. It should be 4-color. It should be the shape of an iPad. It should be all of these things. And they said, fantastic. Yeah, let's just go do it. Not really. They didn't say that. They said, do you understand the economics of book publishing? Do you understand the supply chain of book publishing? Because we could do that, and it would be bespoke at about $50 to $60 per book, and it won't be nationally distributed. You could only get it on Amazon or online. I said, come on. There's got to be a better way. It wasn't just the design of the book. It was the design of an entire infrastructure to support a new format. So everything about change is difficult. But the rewards are great because it makes you more human-centered. It makes you inspired to actually do the things that people could relate to within the organization, to say, you know what? You know the thing about digital transformation, it has very little to do with digital. And the word transformation is the most significant part of that buzzword, which is change. So change becomes a human story. There are so many historic examples, and so many more examples happening right now where companies are losing sight of how to connect with customers. And it's not just about touch points, because if you think it's just about having a mobile app or a responsive website or chatbots, those are just functions enabling some type of experience. It's about the relevance of someone's ability to relate to your business and then support that relationship in every facet of the journey. This is a time for great reinvention because this is a time of real-world disruption. At the core of the challenge is what we deem as our checklist. What is your job today? If you work in customer experience, you probably complain about so many other efforts throughout the organization, whether it's IT or sales or service, trying to do their own thing. But as you've heard throughout this conference, the customers don't see the departments. They don't care about that. They just want what's best for them. And the more that technology becomes part of their life, the more they are in control of getting what's best for them. So the center of reference of which you make decisions, that you hold as the standard, is in the wrong place. We now have to evolve that, and we have to move that. And this is where the challenge begins, because we have to get people to see that. We have to get people to buy in. We have to change how we work and who we work with and why. In my research, I just published this, The State of Digital Transformation. 55% of people said that the number one catalyst for digital transformation was trying to understand the evolving customer behaviors of this new digital world. The number one challenge was trying to understand the evolving customer behaviors in this new world. Because the business itself is not designed to do that. Because we are basing our decisions on business models that are 50 or 60 years old. We're having to think about margins. We're having to think about scale and efficiencies. We're having to think about shareholders and quarterly returns with all of this, in all of this time where we have to take a step back in order to move forward. And that means starting to ask questions about everything around you today. Start questioning your processes, start questioning your decision making, start questioning all of this stuff, because it's not getting you closer to the customer. This is a metaphor for the world in which we live. Every day you click a 3.5-inch floppy disk to save a file. And some of you know exactly why you do that. That makes total sense. I used to save things on a 3.5-inch floppy drive. The other half of the room has no idea what I'm saying right now. To them, that's just a save icon. And the reason why I use this metaphor is because every time you think you're doing the right thing with customer experience, you are basing it around a center of reference that knows the 3.5-inch floppy diskette. So when you bring those worlds together, it looks like this. Hey, have you ever seen one of these before? Oh, it's so cool that you 3D printed the save icon. There's already a disconnect. You'll never understand that if you insist on pushing your perspective on this. or if you insist on pushing people through these old, stodgy touch points, we have to now start questioning what's not only the right thing to do, but what's the best thing to do. And not for you, but for someone else, as we saw in that Steve Jobs video. And so when you start challenging your perspective and how you allow yourself to see the world, do you stand right and say, this is what I know, and this is my reference point, and this is what it's going to be? Or do you just say, you know what? Let's look differently. I'm ready to look at things differently. Because a picture like this says so much. Almost every executive that I know will look at the lady in the front and say, yep, that's our customer. That's exactly who we love. She's the only one in the moment. Look at all of this technology distracting everybody from the moment, but she's there, she's loving it. Or you could start to challenge it, right? It's natural to see people with their phones up and say, put those things down, come on, the moment's happening. Look up. Or we could just accept that we're not actually going to be able to change this. For the parents in the room, for the aunts and uncles in the room, we judge that. We tell kids all the time, live life the way I lived. But to them, they are in the moment. Every person is in the moment. The best we can do is try to understand it and try to inspire it and influence it in productive ways. So you could look at this and say, oh, look at this selfish woman in the front, not sharing this special moment with all her Facebook friends that couldn't be there. They're totally missing out. And this is at the heart of experience design. Can you create experiences that don't just work, but can you create experiences that are meaningful and shareable? Because the best experiences, and you know this as a human being, the best experiences become memories. You just hold on to them. And so now when you start asking different questions, you allow yourself to get different answers. And there's so many efforts happening right now within the organization, one of which is brand experience. So what's brand experience? Well, we tend to confuse it with like brand style guides. This is our font, this is our message, this is our imagery, and then you give this style guide to everybody and that becomes the standard for which they work. But that's creative, that's design, that is not experience. If anything, it's brand reference. Brand experience is this. Whether you're B2B or B2C, there's some aspect of what you do that is supposed to help someone achieve something. Whether it's aspirational, whether it's functional, whatever it is. We don't spend enough time thinking about that. But the best companies do. So then when you relate now what brand experience is to customer experience, just because you're working on aspects of which help the customer through their journey, that is not the definition of customer experience. That's shareholder-centric perspective of customer experience. Customer experience is the sum of all engagements they have with your business throughout the life cycle. It's how they define your work. And this is the hardest part, because you can only control so much today. And there's politics and territory battles within the organization. But one aspect of the customer experience, say your website or say a call center, if it sucks, you will never be 100%. And I think we now need to start spending more time asking ourselves, well, what's the purpose of what we're trying to do? And this is it. When I was writing a book about experience, it was almost impossible to get consensus on a definition for it, which made conversations about brand experience, user experience, customer experience very difficult. We were taking it from a functional perspective, when in fact, an experience is simply something you feel in a moment, something you sense, something you interpret, and it can be measured by how you react. And if you play this out in terms of a customer journey, you recognize that all of these experiences are left to chance today, and they're measured by the very wrong things. If you really want to be customer-centric, if you really want to design incredible experiences, we have to start by asking ourselves, What is the experience we want people to have? And then how does that play out in each moment of truth? Because there's what we say, there's what we talk about, there's what we do, there's the meetings that we have internally about this stuff, and then there's what real people experience. And every single day, this divide gets bigger. You might not see it because you're profitable, but you're actually just squeezing an orange, and you keep squeezing it, when in fact, life is moving on. And this is what leads to disruption, because the bigger the experience divide, the more open people are to trying something new. And this is a big deal right now, because in research I've done with Google over the last couple of years, we found that when someone goes to make a decision, the first device they use is a mobile phone. And on the mobile device, 90% of them are brand agnostic. They have no idea which brand they want. They're open. And 73% of them will make a decision based on the company that was most useful in these moments. It's changing the game. And instead, we keep trying to make this funnel better. So I call it the cluster funnel. It's just never going to work. And it's the same principle that I learned with the table of contents. It's just not the way our brains work anymore. We have too much access to on-demand information. So what we think is the right thing to do versus what is happening outside of our world, this is our opportunity for closing the divide. It's your opportunities, your inspiration for what to do now should not come from your industry in any way, shape, or form. We have to look outside. We have to look at what do your customers do on a daily basis? What products do they love? What apps do they love? What services do they use? And what are the common attributes with those so that we can lead that into our customer experience work? So part of it is journey mapping. Sure, we've all done this or are talking about this, right? But what this process is a state of what is. There is also a state of what isn't. And it can be informed by understanding how people think, what people value. And this is where it leads to true innovation. I'll give you an example. Almost all of our cars have some kind of navigation device in them. I'm pretty sure each of you have a reluctant relationship with it. Yet, these companies spend countless hours and dollars in designing these systems. Yet, it is the #1 weak point in any car experience next to actually buying the car at a dealership. I was just in Amsterdam. A friend of mine had this really lovely car, decided he really wanted to pick me up in it. We're going to a restaurant, punches in the directions on his phone, and puts it right in front of the navigation system. So I had to take a picture of it. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, I think that's fantastic. It's a $2,500 option on your car. It's the most expensive phone holder I've ever seen. This is that user experience and customer experience in mind. We have to do something about what we do when we get back to work. Can't be the same thing. Yet there's no time to do it because you have meetings stacked on the hour. Thank you, Microsoft Outlook, for making that the default. You have emails that are relentless. You have people who don't necessarily believe in what you believe. And so there's an element of this where each of us, especially in this future economy, have to learn new things, because you can't just keep trying to push what's old or what's legacy or what exists on to new directions or on to new people. But the hardest part, and this was a real big deal for me when I was writing the book, was having to unlearn the things that I held as process, unlearn the things that I held as standard, unlearn the metrics that I used as this is a definition of success. Because the new customer actually has a different definition than you of things like privacy, of things like happiness, of things that are aspirational that we don't even realize, that we don't understand. As Noreen joked earlier about millennials, when I talk to someone in HR, for example, say, "Hey, what's some of the greatest challenges you're facing inside the organization?" They'll say, "Millennials." And I'll say, "What does that even mean?" As if all millennials are like this one master being that they're out to destroy you. I said, hey, have you ever had this conversation where you said, hey, what is the other challenge? And someone just said, old people? I mean, it's that sweeping of a generalization when in fact all it is just human differences of how people grew up, what they hold a standard, how they want to work, how they want to be productive. And so we impose this old way of working and we want to protect it and we want to hold on to it because, oh my gosh, it's all we know. But that's when you start to go down a new path, is when you unlearn. Well, what if? What if we started to think differently? And I'm not talking about open workspaces. I'm talking about really starting to understand what's at the heart of this change. Because this isn't going to go backwards. This is going to play out, and it gets more radical every year. And in my research, I found Generation C, which was, the C stands for connected, where you were starting to realize that people who live a digital lifestyle shared behaviors, shared interests, shared common sense of decision making. It wasn't about demographics at all. You're actually reprogramming your brain every single time you pick up your phone. You look at it about 1,500 times a week. That adds up to about 177 minutes every day. And in that, you're learning how to process information, share information, find information. You saw it play out in politics. It is absolutely changing everybody. So that's where we begin. This is an art series where the photographer removes the smartphone from everyday scenarios as a way of showing us just how deeply ingrained this is in our lives. It's like that frog boiling water story. You know, you just don't realize that it's changing because it's happening over time. It's happening to you, and it's definitely happening to your customers and your employees. And at the core of this, technology is actually putting us in what I call an ecosystem, because literally everything around you reminds you that you're at the center of your own universe. This plays out in interesting ways. This is a real sidewalk in China. Who doesn't want this in an airport? Or anywhere, really. Maslow's hierarchy of needs changing too. Even if it makes no sense whatsoever, this is valuable to some people. Like, this is all they think about. So what's happening is, I call it lovingly, of course, that we're now trying to sell or employ a market of accidental narcissists. This is where we begin our work, because this is why you can't impose things on people, because they are learning that they can have what they want when they want. I have an app in Silicon Valley that I use pretty religiously. It's called Filled, and it's essentially the Uber of gasoline. So I could be at a store, I could be at work, I could be wherever. I just leave my car there, comes and finds it, I come back to a full tank of gas. Just like Uber, I get the receipt and email. People say, Brian, that's absolutely lazy. Is it? Because you absolutely love going to a gas station? Because you love that experience so much? No, you hate it. It's a burden. Like, I'm empty. And the only reason you're empty is because you wanted to prolong the time of going to the gas station. We only have so much time in this world, and things are starting to become more precious. Services are addressing that. But the point is that becomes the standard for experience. Once you taste a good experience, that is the standard. And that spills over into every industry, whether you know it or not. And some of you in the room who work in B2B, I guarantee you there are human beings in your world. That experience becomes the standard. Where's my Uber of healthcare? Where's my Uber of dentistry? Where's my Uber of insurance? I want things my way now. And this is where we have to start looking for design cues, because innovation and customer experience is all the things you do to conform to how markets are changing, not continually pushing them to conform to your touch points or to your journeys. And we have to start asking different questions. We have to now start thinking, what else can we do? And it's this. This is what inspired my book to be a different design. What started the pain was a video of a 1-year-old baby using an iPad as if that's the only thing she knew. And her father thought it would be funny if he took the iPad away and gave her a magazine. She starts crying because it doesn't work. And her father says, Steve Jobs has forever recoded my daughter's brain. To her, a magazine is an iPad that doesn't work. And it will be that way for the rest of her life. At the time, I was just procrastinating, maybe looking at some cat videos on YouTube. Stumbled on this video and mind blown, because that's exactly the same analogy with the 3.5-inch diskette. We know the world based on how we grew up in it. And we've learned new technologies as we've come along. And to us, those are great achievements. And we've fought to implement those new technologies in every aspect of our work. And then comes along an entirely different mindset, an entirely new set of expectations. And there's a collision between them. And right now, it's working for us because there aren't really that many choices. But now, this is an incredible revolution that's playing out. One side is going to win. And that's the side we have to start to better understand. And when that plays out in the form of customer experience or experience design, it looks like this. This is how we do things today. This is a parking sign. Parking signs exist this way pretty much everywhere. This is in New York, and I want you to think about the moment you actually have to read it. You're in a car, it's New York, so everyone's yelling at you and honking, and you feel incredible stress and pressure, like, can I park here? I don't know. Because whoever designed these things never thought about that. And more so, they never thought about how does your brain work today? How can you quickly process information based on how you go through life as a human being? So they realized the problem, so they basically branched out to all kinds of different agencies in New York to say, hey, help us redesign the parking sign. And so this is what they got. Better, but it's still a parking sign. And you still have to read it in a Z formation, which is difficult to do in a moment like that. Or you can start to look at design cues from how people just process information today. Can you do it visually? Can you do it in something that just, in one pop, 2 seconds, can you get it? This is just one example of new possibilities, but you wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't know how people process information differently. So you can go on this path of just trying to make the same things better, and or you can go on a path that really starts to understand true brand relevance, true customer experience. At this point, you can still have your brand style guide, but you still need to think about what that experience should be, and then use that as the standard for all design. Because if you think about it, if you close your eyes and you think about the last really great experience you had, it's going to come to life. It'll make you smile. Maybe some of you will get goosebumps. And that'll be different for every single one of you in the room. And that's now our job in customer experiences, to design those things. Understanding that you cannot be customer-centric if you're not empathetic. I call it the undercover boss moment. I love that show, even though every episode has the same ending. But there's that moment of empathy where the executive understands, wow, I forgot what it was like. I forgot what it was like to be an employee, or I forgot what it was like to be a customer. So this leads to this world, this new world of which we'll design the future of customer engagement. And, by the way, employee engagement as well. Define that brand experience. Don't just tell me what I should see. Don't just reinforce that with messages. What is it that I'm supposed to feel or sense? Because that becomes the work that defines how you invest in customer experience. Beyond journey mapping, understanding what touch points don't you have? What happens in those touch points? How do they play out naturally? Am I putting in front of people a parking sign? Or am I reimagining what happens in those touch points? Because that leads to a new form of user experience. All of these things are related, which then becomes the brand. It's working backwards as we heard in the Steve Jobs video. This is what he means by reverse engineering. All of this becomes what Apple and companies like IDEO, what they do so well is they take this approach to human-centered design. It starts with what incredible value can we give to someone in a world where how they define value is different than what you're selling in terms of value. And that's becoming increasingly so every day. When I was thinking about the book, I started looking outside of my industry to be inspired. And I started spending a lot of time with Disney, because Disney is in the experience design business. And the whole idea of character development, the whole idea of storyboarding really brought to life a whole new approach to customer experience that was human. So when we see things like human-centered design, even that sounds technical. I think really what we're trying to say is just, what does it mean to be more relatable? How do we design emotional hooks, then, that bring to life the experience design that we're setting out to deliver? How do we then take all of that and play it out in a new type of customer journey where every touch point isn't just effective or productive, it actually feels great, it feels intuitive, maybe it's invisible. The best experiences are when technology is the most invisible. And then how do we deliver this on the buy and the own side of the journey? And you have to start thinking about a different approach to journey mapping, where you look at every aspect of how someone goes through your journey. How this then comes to life beyond the things that you're responsible for today. Because just because you've done touchpoint work or you've reinvented the journey, whatever it is, there's still the whole side of experience where someone actually uses your product or talks to your representatives or uses your service. That is also part of experience design. That's what Apple does so well. There's a story arc that they all operate against. This is something I got really deep inside Apple and got a bunch of access to stuff I wasn't supposed to see. And it was fascinating. You could see the story arc. Every aspect of it would bring these worlds together. There's even a story arc for the box. I'm not kidding. And that story arc aligns with the overall story arc of the entire company. Philips, for example, I was just spending time with them in Amsterdam. They're starting to play with this in terms of what they call an experience flow. And they're really bringing to life every aspect that affects packaging and how it opens to the product design, how the product functions, if you need help, what that looks like, to see if every aspect could be aligned around essentially an experience style guide. It's a new way of thinking, it's a different way of thinking, but it's absolutely human. So I want you to think about this as you go back to work. What would you do if you could start like this? Because this is the advantage that every startup has. They're literally human-centered. They're bootstrapped, they're resource-constrained, they're budget-constrained, yet they have to beat you. And they will, because they start this way. And this is what leads to true innovation, not iteration. And iteration is important because I think a lot of times we think we're being innovative, when in fact we're being iterative. We're using new technologies, unfortunately, based on legacy mindsets and perspectives, and as such, processes and operations. So we're just kind of pushing forward, but we're not really innovating. And this is a time for innovation and iteration, but really we need more innovation. Iteration is doing the same things better. Innovation is doing new things that unlocks new value, ultimately leading to disruption, which is doing new things that make the old things obsolete. Once you've tasted a fantastic experience, it becomes the standard for every industry. This is why Starbucks looks at the fintech industry for inspiration and what it can do. This is why so many companies look outside of their industry to say, what could we do differently? How could we reinvent the parking sign in a way that's more usable and valuable and even delightful to someone who's not me? Because sometimes I get in my own way, and that's called cognitive bias or validation bias or all of the above. This is space. The future actually doesn't exist. It's unwritten because we're not innovating. We're not pushing forward. We're doing iteration. And this is not a time for digital iteration. This is time for digital transformation. This is why I'm inspired, because the future is actually going to be written by what you do, and also by what you do differently. That's what become the books and the playbooks and the presentations and the future case studies of how we decided to go down a different path. And when you bring the worlds of brand experience, user experience, customer experience together, what they all share is the letter X. And that's the higher purpose, is the experience that we're going to design and use as our foundation for delivering better customer experiences that are meaningful, shareable, and unforgettable. The future is yours to design, so thank you very much for your time.